Sophie Harper was a 29-year-old graphic designer living in the vibrant city of Bristol, England, a place where cobblestone streets echoed with the chatter of street performers, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the salty sea breeze. To those who met Sophie now, it seemed she'd always been part of this colorful, bustling tapestry. But not long ago, she had been clawing her way out of a wreckage she never saw coming. It all began with James. James had been her university boyfriend back in Cambridge, a man who could light up a room just by stepping into it, with a smile so warm it made strangers feel like old friends. He was charming, effortlessly witty, and ambitious, with dreams as vast as the English Channel. When he launched his career in property development, Sophie thought they were building a solid future. 3 years together. 3 years of late-night fish and chip runs, weekend strolls along the Avon Gorge, and lazy Sunday mornings tangled in bed, sunlight slipping through the sheer curtains of their modest Clifton flat. Sophie believed they were weaving memories that would one day become cherished family lore. Looking back, there were cracks, small ones she chose to ignore. James was restless, always chasing the next big project, the next thrill. Sometimes, she'd catch him staring at his phone a little too long, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. But she told herself every relationship had its shadows. The night that was supposed to be the pinnacle of their love story was set in a cozy riverside venue draped with fairy lights. Friends and colleagues mingled around rustic wooden tables laden with pork pies and pims, while a local band played acoustic covers in the corner. Sophie's cheeks flushed as she realized this wasn't just a party, it was their engagement party. James stood center stage, microphone in hand, looking every bit the man of her dreams. Her heart hammered as he dropped to one knee, a sapphire ring catching the light and scattering tiny stars across the room. Cheers erupted. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered yes, voice trembling but sure. For a fleeting moment, life felt perfectly aligned. She floated through the celebration, the ring heavy on her finger, both grounding and surreal. But as the night wore on, the noise, the congratulations, the endless snapshots capturing her supposed happiness began to suffocate her. Her phone had almost no signal inside, so she slipped out into the courtyard for air. Soft fairy lights twinkled across the wrought iron fence, and a small fountain gurgled gently nearby. Sophie pressed her back against the cool brick wall and let out a shaky breath, staring up at the stars peeking through the city glow. Then she heard it. Low voices, urgent, too close. She turned, and what she saw shattered her world. Her younger sister, Emily, was pressed against James. Their lips locked in a kiss that spoke of secrets kept too long. Their bodies were tangled, as if this moment had been waiting to happen all night. For a second, Sophie's mind refused to process the betrayal. Emily, her sister with glossy chestnut hair, flawless Instagram feed, and a boldness Sophie used to admire, was kissing James, the man who had just slipped a ring onto Sophie's finger, and James wasn't pulling away. His hands tangled in Emily's hair, his body leaning into hers like this was the truest thing he'd ever known. The courtyard tilted, her stomach dropped so violently she thought she might be sick. The sound of her own pulse roared in her ears. She froze, breath caught between gasp and scream. Then Emily's eyes opened. They locked on Sophie's. For the briefest moment, a flicker of guilt crossed Emily's face, but it wasn't pure shame. There was defiance there, a spark that said, "No regrets." James's eyes followed hers. He turned, panic flooding his face like he'd been woken from a dream. "Sophie?" he stammered. But Sophie couldn't hear him. She couldn't stay. Her heels clicked sharply against the courtyard stones as she bolted back inside. Faces turned as she rushed past, but she didn't stop to explain. She grabbed her purse, pushed open the venue doors, and ran until the city swallowed her. By the time Sophie collapsed into her little hatchback, hands trembling so badly she could barely fit the key into the ignition. Tears blurred her vision and raw sobs shook her throat. She drove aimlessly at first, the city lights blurring into streaks. Eventually, she found herself at a cheap hotel near the old city, its flickering neon sign buzzing like a bad dream. She paid for a room without remembering the card transaction, stumbled upstairs, and fell face first onto the bed. Still in her party dress, the sapphire ring cold against her skin. She didn't know how long she lay there before her phone buzzed. The first message was from Emily that I'm so sorry, sophomore. I didn't mean for you to find out this way. I love him. The second from James. I thought proposing would fix things, but I'm in love with Emily. We're meant to be. Sophie stared at the screen until the words blurred. Each sentence twisted like a knife. 3 years of love, of late-night fish and chips, whispered plans, reduced to a placeholder role. She was nothing more than a stand-in until James realized he wanted her sister and Emily. How could she do this to her? Sophie cried until her body shook, until the pillowcase was soaked, until silence swallowed her whole, and in that silence, one thought whispered. They didn't even try to hide it. They didn't think they needed to. That night, Sophie understood betrayal wasn't just about losing James. It was about losing Emily. About realizing the family she trusted might not choose her when it mattered most. She didn't know it then, but this was only the first fracture. The worst was still to come. 5 days passed in that dim hotel room, its humming fridge and peeling wallpaper a bleak soundtrack to Sophie's unraveling. She learned 2 things. She could run out of tears and still feel hollow, and her savings vanished faster than a decent cuppa in a Bristol cafe. Each morning, she stared at herself in the cracked bathroom mirror. Smudged mascara, puffy eyes, and the sapphire ring dangling like a cruel joke on the edge of the sink. On the 5th day, Sophie steeled herself. She only needed an hour. Grab her laptop, hard drives, clothes, sketchbooks, then disappear again. Answer client emails, fake a flu, keep her unraveling life from showing. Driving back to Clifton felt like crawling into a lion's den. The sun was low, casting long shadows over the Georgian terraces. Every red light felt like a personal vendetta. When she pulled up outside her flat, her palms were slick on the steering wheel. She rehearsed a plan. Quick smile to neighbors, no eye contact, key in, grab, leave. The key slipped once in the lock, scraping the paint. The door swung open, and Sophie's plan died. Her living room was full. Her mom, dad, and Aunt Margaret, who'd been staying since her husband died, sat like a tableau on the sofas. And there, a few steps behind them, stood Emily and James, shoulder to shoulder, as if ordered from a catalog, and no one shouted surprise. No one looked ashamed. They smiled like they belonged in Sophie's home. Her mum moved first. "Oh, Sophie," she breathed, arms open as if she could pull her back in time. Sophie stood frozen, clutching her keys, an animal thrashing beneath her skin. "We were worried." Her dad said, voice warm but rehearsed, like greeting a distant relative at church. James avoided her eyes. Emily's were rimmed red, soft, glassy, like she'd been crying in front of a mirror, testing which angle made her look most pitiful. "What are you all doing here?" Sophie's voice cracked like a snapped twig. "We wanted to talk," her mum said, already reaching for a comfort Sophie didn't want. "You disappeared. We were scared." Scared of what? That I'd spoil their little love story by existing? Sophie shot back. Before she could step back, Emily closed the gap and flung her arms around Sophie. Her perfume, honeysuckle with a sugary twist, coated the air. "I'm so sorry, Soph." Emily sobbed into her shoulder, body trembling with a performance perfected for Instagram. "I didn't mean to hurt you." Sophie stood stiff as a lamppost. "Don't," she said, voice thin. She peeled Emily off. "I'm here to get my things. That's it." James decided to speak then, his voice calm but hollow. "You don't have to leave. I'm moving out. I'm going to live with Emily." A sound left Sophie's throat. Half laugh, half warning. Then she saw it in the way her family looked at them. Subtle but there, soft eyes, lifted mouths, relief, approval. Aunt Margaret clasped her hands as if watching the final scene of a rom-com where fate finally got it right. Mum's gaze glittered between Emily and James, like she was watching a story she could defend to anyone. "What exactly are you all smiling about?" Sophie demanded, heat lacing every word. Her mum blinked, as if Sophie missed her cue. "We can't undo what happened. But Emily and James are in love. We have to accept it. It's for the best." "For the best?" Sophie repeated, trying to crack open the phrase and find reason inside. Emily sniffled, chin lifted. I wish I told you sooner. I didn't want you to find out like that. But we're soulmates, sophomore. She glanced at James with a tiny triumphant smile. Then, because the scene called for it, she rose on her toes and kissed him, quick, careful, deliberate. Proof, claim. Mum dabbed at her eye. Aunt Margaret hummed. Approval disguised as empathy. Dad's mouth formed a line Sophie had learned to dread. Don't be childish, Sophie, he said. Consonants clipped. Things happen. You should be happy for your sister. You can't make this all about you. Something inside Sophie went still. She broke off our engagement. He proposed and kissed her the same night. And you're standing in my living room telling me to be happy? You're jealous, Aunt Margaret added, as if diagnosing a stain. That's natural. But family sticks together. The room throbbed. The plants on the windowsill looked greener, the rug brighter. As if Sophie's body had dialed the world's saturation to survival mode. A laugh slipped out. Sharp as a blade. Get out. They blinked. It didn't compute. Get out, she said. Each word a stone. Mum's voice cracked. Sweetheart, you don't mean that. Sophie stepped around her into the hallway, then her bedroom. The door clicked behind her. Not a slam, just a decision. She pulled a duffel bag from the closet. Clothes, charger, laptop, sketchbooks, tablets, toiletries. Quick, automatic, careful. She stood at her dresser, staring at the sapphire ring's pretty lie. She slid it off and dropped it into a ceramic dish shaped like a leaf. It made a soft clink, like a coin falling into a wishing well. She no longer believed in. Voices swelled and fell in the living room. The murmur of a family convinced they could talk anything into being, with each zip and fold. The air in Sophie's room grew lighter. When she opened the door again, they turned toward her like she'd missed her cue to apologize. She lifted the bag, slung it over her shoulder, and walked to the front door. Mum reached out, fingers closing on Sophie's wrist. Please don't do this, she pleaded. We can figure it out. You can stay. He'll move his things. We can make it work. Sophie looked down at the hand on her skin. Take your hand off me, she said quietly. And leave. Mum let go. The look she gave Sophie carried a lifetime of expectations she was no longer willing to meet. Where are you going to go? Dad asked, as if concern could replace accountability. Away from this, Sophie said. Emily stepped forward, eyes shining. I'm sorry, she whispered. Sophie understood she meant she was sorry she wouldn't accept the script where she played the saint who clapped at their wedding. She opened the door. Out, she said one last time. She didn't wait to see if they listened. Stepping into the corridor, the duffel thumped against her hip. The door clicked shut with a satisfying finality. Outside, the sky was bruised peach and lavender. Sophie tossed the bag in the back seat, slid in, and pressed her forehead to the steering wheel. For a heartbeat, she thought she might pass out. Then the engine hummed low and faithful. She pulled out into the street. Relief and rage rode shotgun. She felt taller and hollow all at once. Like a tree struck by lightning, still standing, but forever changed. They had chosen Emily's happiness over her dignity, James's want over her worth. If they could normalize such a loud betrayal, what else would they excuse? She pictured the living room without her. Mum smoothing cushions for Emily, Dad offering James a pint, Aunt Margaret telling a story about how real love disrupts the best-laid plans. This wasn't the last ambush. It was the opening act. And Sophie had no idea where she'd sleep that night or how she'd explain the gap in deliverables to a client who didn't care about her broken heart. But she knew this. Whatever came next, she would not stand in that room again and let them teach her how small she was allowed to be. The night Sophie left her flat with nothing but a duffel bag and a bruised heart, she didn't drive toward any destination. She drove toward absence. Streetlights blurred past like ghosts, Bristol's skyline rising and falling in her rearview mirror, as if even the city didn't know where to stand. Eventually, exhaustion forced her off the motorway, and she ended up in a short-term rental near the harbourside. A tiny flat with posters of old rock bands curling on the walls and a mattress that smelled faintly of stale cigarettes. It wasn't home, but it was empty of their faces. That was enough. The first weeks blurred into a collage of work deadlines, half-eaten takeaway boxes, and silence that was too loud at night. Her clients didn't know their logos and layouts had been designed between tears, that she muted Zoom calls to hide the cracking in her voice. But she met every deadline, sometimes even early. If grief hollowed her out, productivity filled the space. By the end of the month, Sophie found a new flat in Southville, a fourth-floor walk-up with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. Smaller than her old place, but drenched in light. The kind that made plants greedy and softened shadows. The first night, she dragged a chair close to the window and watched Bristol glow. It felt like an act of defiance, proof she could exist without them. Still, the silence pressed in. That's when Lucy started showing up. Sophie had met Lucy years earlier at a co-working space. A copywriter with a razor-sharp wit and a laugh that shattered tension like a dropped glass. Lucy was the kind of friend who could insult you and heal you in the same breath. When she saw Sophie's packed boxes stacked by the window, she didn't ask for explanations. "Well," Lucy said, arching a brow, "if you're running away, at least you're doing it with good lighting." Lucy became Sophie's anchor. She dragged her out for coffee, even when Sophie swore she was buried under client work, signed them up for pub quizzes, coaxed her to art openings, and shoved sausage rolls into her hand when Sophie forgot to eat. With Lucy, Sophie didn't have to pretend to be okay. She didn't demand explanations. She gave Sophie space until she poured the story out in jagged pieces. "I know James is a prat," Lucy muttered one evening, stabbing her fork into a salad. "But Emily? That's next-level betrayal." Sophie shrugged, staring at condensation sliding down her glass. "They didn't just betray me. They replaced me." Lucy reached across the table and squeezed her wrist. "No one replaces you. Not really. They just downgrade without realizing it." Her words sat in Sophie like medicine she didn't want to swallow but needed. Then there was her cousin, Tom. They'd grown up like siblings, swapping secrets at family barbecues while the grown-ups played cards inside. When Tom found out, his voice trembled with disbelief over the phone. "They let Emily steal your fiancé, then sided with her? Unbelievable. You don't need them, Sophie. You've got me." He called every few days, sometimes just to rant on her behalf, sometimes to send memes that made her laugh. He reminded her that family could mean choice, not obligation. Work became more than survival, it became escape. Sophie landed bigger clients, branding gigs for local businesses trying to stand out in Bristol's crowded scene. She picked up side projects designing merch for indie bands, which brought a community that didn't care about Emily, James, or her parents' opinions. They cared about her talent. Success crept in quietly, like ivy curling over an abandoned wall, and yet beneath it, a petty ember glowed, nursed without shame. Sophie kept her social media public. Every new client, every late-night mural shot, every brunch with Lucy, she posted. Not for followers, but so her family could see her thriving without them. She wanted them to wonder if she missed them, and she wanted the answer to be obvious. One afternoon, a thick cream envelope arrived. Emily and James's wedding invitation. Scripted fonts, embossed. Edges, the works. Her fingers trembled as she tore it open. They wanted her there. Not just to watch, but to validate, to pretend none of it mattered. She ripped the invitation into strips, each tear a declaration. Later that evening, Lucy tossed the pieces into her fireplace, flames curling greedily around the shreds. "Good riddance," she said, raising her wine glass. Tom FaceTimed from his flat, cheering as Sophie held up the empty envelope. Some friends skipped the wedding once they heard the story. Their absence was its own vindication. Proof not everyone bought the soulmate fairy tale. Months turned into a year. Seasons shifted. The skyline from Sophie's window became familiar, the hum of traffic below almost comforting. The weight of betrayal lessened, replaced by a sturdier sense of self. She was no longer the woman sobbing into a hotel pillow with mascara running down her cheeks. She was someone who'd survived the storm and built a new roof over her head. But healing is never linear. Some nights, the silence clawed back in. She'd lie awake, city lights pulsing beyond the glass, and wonder if she was missing something essential by cutting her family off completely. Then she'd remember her mom's face, the softness in her eyes as she watched Emily kiss James, And the doubt hardened into resolve that it wasn't just Emily and James, it was everyone who chose to normalize her pain. So when her phone lit up with their numbers. Birthdays? Holidays? Just checking in. She let it ring. When Facebook messages slipped into her inbox, she ignored them. When they sent holiday cards one December, she tucked them into the bin unopened. She wasn't interested in pretending by the time her business thrived and her days were filled with friends who treated her like more than a placeholder. Sophie thought she'd buried that chapter for good. Until one morning, her phone rang again at an unfamiliar number. She almost silenced it. But something inside hesitated. A chill whispering, "Answer." She pressed the screen. To her ear, "Sophie." The voice cracked. It was her mother. "Please don't hang up." The past she thought she'd buried clawed its way back. "Please don't hang up." Her mother's voice was thin, frayed at the edges. The same way it sounded when she was sick, whispering from a hospital bed. Sophie froze, coffee cooling between her palms. The sunshine streaming through her Southville window suddenly felt harsh. Exposing. "Mom." She whispered, throat tight. "Yes," came the quick reply, relief spilling into the syllable, "Oh, thank God. I didn't think you'd answer." Sophie's thumb hovered over the red button, but curiosity, morbid and heavy, pinned her to the line. "It's about Emily and James." Of course it was. Sophie stared at the steam fading from her coffee, her reflection rippling faintly on its surface. "What about them?" "They're in trouble," her mother said, words tumbling like loose bricks. "The business, the food truck, they failed. Investors pulled out. They borrowed too much. Now people are after them. Loan sharks. It's bad, Sophie. Very, very bad." Sophie sat silent, letting the words settle like ash. Loan sharks. Debt. Collapse. They owed almost £80,000. Her mother's voice cracked with desperation. "They've sold what they can. We've helped all we're able. So have James's parents. They're out of options. They're scared." "Scared?" Sophie echoed, but the word tugged at nothing soft inside her. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked slowly. "Because you can help." Coffee cooled to sludge between Sophie's fingers. "I know you're doing well. We see your posts, your business. You've got savings, don't you? You could loan it to them, just until they get back on their feet. Please. If they don't pay soon, I'm afraid for what might happen." Sophie pushed back from the table, pacing her flat as her pulse hammered in her temples. "Why isn't Emily asking me herself?" Silence crackled. "They didn't want me to call you," her mother said. "They're too proud, too ashamed. But I can't just stand by." Her voice cracked again. "I'm begging you, Sophie. You're her sister." "Sister?" Sophie laughed, bitter and jagged. As if that bond was unbreakable after what she did to me. Images clawed up. James's lips pressed to Emily's in the courtyard. Her family's approving smiles, her mother dabbing at her eyes while Sophie's heart shattered. "You think I'm going to bail them out after everything?" "They made mistakes," her mother rushed. "We all did. But this is life or death. You don't want her blood on your hands, do you?" The manipulation was sharp enough to draw blood. Sophie gripped the edge of the counter, nails biting into the wood. "You lost the right to ask me for anything the night you chose them over me," she said, voice low but steady. "All of you did." "Please," her mother whispered. "If you don't help, she could die. I can't lose my daughter." "You already did," Sophie said, harsher than she intended. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then came her mother's trembling fury. "Selfish. That's what you are. Emily could die and you just sit there clutching your money. How can you call yourself family?" "Family." The word stung like a curse. "I don't owe them anything," Sophie snapped. "Not money, not forgiveness, not one more second of my life. Please, Sophie." She hung up, her hands shook as she dropped the phone onto the counter, chest heaving with a cocktail of rage and relief. She slid down the cabinets until she sat on the cold tiles, the chill anchoring her as guilt noted at the edges of her resolve. Her mother had begged, had cried, and for a flicker of a second, Sophie felt that old pull, the desperate urge to make her proud, to win back her love. But then she remembered the living room, their smiles, their words. "Don't be childish. Be happy for your sister." That memory doused the flicker like water on a flame. She stayed on the floor until the shaking subsided, until her breath steadied, until the phone lay silent on the counter. She wasn't the villain here. She repeated it like a mantra. They had betrayed her. They had chosen Emily. They had defended her. Sophie wasn't selfish, she was surviving. But the weight of her choice pressed heavy and cold against her chest. For days, it followed her like an unwelcome shadow. Every client meeting, every trivia night with Lucy, every run to the corner shop. It trailed her like a ghost at a tea night. It seeped into her dreams, twisting into scenes where Emily cried out for help, and Sophie turned her back still. When her phone buzzed again with her mother's number, she let it ring when voicemails thick with tears piled up. She deleted them without listening. She told herself she had drawn the line. But deep down, Sophie knew one thing with bone-deep certainty. Emily and James weren't finished with her. They never were. It was Mrs. Whitaker who warned Sophie first. The elderly widow lived 2 doors down from Sophie's flat, a sharp-eyed woman in her 70s who had made a habit of watching the neighborhood from her balcony like a hawk. One Thursday afternoon, as Sophie was hunched over her laptop, polishing a client's logo, her phone buzzed with Mrs. Whitaker's name. She never called unless it was urgent. Sophie, the voice was tight, edged with concern. There's a couple outside your flat. They've been shouting your name, pounding on the door. They don't look right. A cold shiver ran down Sophie's spine. What do they look like? She asked, already knowing. Tall man, dark hair, pacing like he's ready to throw a punch. A woman, loud, insistent, pretty but with anger spilling all over her face. Emily and James. Mrs. Whitaker sighed, her breath rattling through the phone. They've been at it for almost an hour now. Want me to call the police? No, Sophie said quickly, voice steadier than she felt. I'll handle it. She grabbed her bag, bolted for the car, heart hammering like a frantic drumbeat. Every red light was a cursed B by the time Sophie pulled into the parking lot. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in streaks of blood orange and violet. There they were. Emily was slamming her fists against Sophie's door, voice shrill enough to cut through the hum of traffic. James stalked back and forth like a caged animal, jaw clenched, eyes darting wildly. Neighbors peeked cautiously from behind curtains. The whole complex seemed to be holding its breath. Sophie climbed out of her car, clutching her phone like a weapon. What the hell are you doing here? She shouted across the lot. Emily spun around, face flushed, hair disheveled, eyes wild for a moment. She looked nothing like the polished influencer Sophie had grown to resent. She looked desperate. James turned too, gaze locking on Sophie with a heat equal parts fury and pleading. Sophie, Emily started, voice high-pitched but threaded with softness. We just want to talk. I don't want to hear it. Sophie snapped, holding her phone higher. Leave before I call the police. James's eyes flickered, and in 2 strides he closed the distance. Before Sophie could react, he slapped the phone from her hand. It hit the pavement with a sickening crack, skidding out of reach, her breath caught. Fear spiked hot and paralyzing. Don't. She whispered. We're not here to hurt you, James said, though his stance said otherwise. We just need a conversation. That's all. Emily stepped forward, voice trembling but laced with anger. Mum told me about your call. How you're blocking everyone, acting like a victim. It's been years, Sophie. You need to get over it. We're family. Family. That word again, stretched thin until it was meaningless. Sophie shook her head. You show up here uninvited, threaten me, then tell me to get over it? You're insane. We sold everything we had. Emily pressed on, ignoring the edge in Sophie's voice. Our house, jewelry. We've scraped together what we could. But it's not enough. We need to know that when things get worse, you'll help us. You're the only one left. Sophie let out a laugh, bitter and sharp. Help you? I hate you both. You think you can tear my life apart and then come crawling back for a handout. James's eyes narrowed. Voice dropped low. Dangerous. We're not leaving until you agree. Her stomach flipped. Agree to what? Emily pulled a folded piece of paper from her bag and thrust it toward Sophie. Sign this. Says you'll loan us money when we ask. Just a promise. Something to show the people we owe that help is coming. Sophie's hands curled into fists. You're out of your minds. Even if I signed it, it wouldn't hold up in court. And even if it did, I'd never put my name on anything for you. Emily's face twisted in fury in one sudden motion. She shoved Sophie hard, her back slammed against the wall. Breath whooshed out of her. You owe us, she hissed, eyes blazing. We're family. You don't get to just walk away. Every instinct screamed to shove her back, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she'd inflicted. But Sophie held herself still, trembling with restraint. She would not give them the satisfaction. Instead, she lunged for her phone where it lay on the pavement. Her fingers closed around it, and she bolted for her car. Thank God she'd left the engine running. Emily shouted Sophie's name, voice tearing through the air. James lunged forward, but Sophie slammed the door shut and hit the gas. Tires screeched against asphalt as she peeled out of the lot, adrenaline surging through her veins. A few blocks away, parked under the flicker of a convenience store sign, she dialed 999 with shaking hands. Her voice trembled as she told the operator everything. The shouting, the threats, the shove, the attempted break. And by the time she circled back, police cars lined the curb outside her complex. Red and blue lights flashed against the brick walls. Emily and James stood in her yard, faces twisted in protest as officers cuffed them. Sophie watched from the sidewalk, arms wrapped tight around herself. Emily's voice rose above the chaos. Shrill, desperate. She's lying. She's making this up. But no one was listening as the officers loaded them into the back of the van. A strange weight lifted from Sophie's chest. Relief, yes, but also fear, because if they were willing to corner her like this, what would they do next once they were free again? Her phone buzzed in her pocket with a new voicemail. She didn't need to check to know it was from her mother. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. A week passed before Sophie saw her parents again. She half hoped they'd keep their distance, that Emily and James's arrest would finally convince them to leave her out of the wreckage. But hope, as always, proved fragile. One late afternoon, as Sophie watered the succulents on her balcony, a slow, hesitant knock echoed through her flat. Through the peephole, she saw them, her mum and dad, standing side by side, looking smaller than she remembered. Their posture carried a weight she'd never seen before, as if the world had pressed hard enough to bend them. For a moment, she almost didn't open the door. Her body remembered the last time. Their words echoing like scars. Don't be childish. Be happy for your sister. But something in their faces, creased deeper, eyes dulled, made Sophie twist the handle. The door opened only a crack. What do you want? Her voice was steady, but her heart pounded in her ears. Her mum stepped forward first, face crumpling the moment she saw Sophie. Tears spilled before she spoke. Oh, Sophie, she whispered, using the nickname that hadn't passed her lips in years. I'm so sorry. Her dad nodded, the sternness that once anchored him gone. We were wrong. He said, the word heavy as if dragged across gravel. We were wrong to take Emily's side. We see that now. Sophie stood frozen, the wood of the doorframe pressing into her shoulder. She wanted to believe them, to let those words patch the hole they'd carved. But she'd learned better than to accept bandages over wounds never cleaned. Her mum reached for Sophie's hand. Her palm was warm, trembling. We should have defended you. We should have protected you. Instead, we failed. We failed you as parents. A knot twisted in Sophie's chest. For years, she'd fantasized about hearing those words. But standing there now, reality felt different, softer. Yet too late. Her dad's gaze didn't waver. We heard about what happened outside your flat. What they tried to do. There's no excuse. We can't defend them anymore. He swallowed hard. The sound rough. We've cut them off. Completely. Emily and James are on their own now. We should have done it the night they hurt you. We didn't, and we're ashamed of that. The silence that followed was thick, punctuated only by her mum's quiet sobs. Sophie let their words wash over her, every sentence pulling at old scars. Part of her wanted to collapse into their arms, to let those apologies stitch her back together. Another part, the part that had built a new life from ashes, stayed rigid, holding the line. I appreciate that you see it now, she said, voice low. But where was this years ago? When I begged you to see me, to hear me? You didn't just fail me once. You abandoned me every time you pretended Emily's happiness mattered more than my pain. Her mum's tears fell harder. You're right. We can't undo it. But please, please let us try now. Let us make it right. Sophie shook her head slowly. That I don't want to rebuild something that cost me myself. I've learned to live without you. To breathe without this family dragging me down. I can't go back. I won't. Their faces crumpled with hurt. But Sophie's resolve didn't falter. Her dad's voice cracked. Are you saying you'll never forgive us? I'm saying I need peace, she answered. And if forgiving you means reopening wounds that almost killed me, then no. Not now. Maybe not ever. My peace matters more. The words hung between them like a final verdict. They didn't argue. Maybe they couldn't. Maybe they knew they had no defense left. After a moment, her mum wiped her cheeks and whispered, Will you at least unblock our numbers so we know you're alive? So we can hear your voice sometimes, even if it's only a hello. Sophie hesitated. That wall she'd built had kept her safe, but maybe leaving a crack wouldn't destroy it. Slowly, she nodded. I'll unblock you. But don't expect more than that. Don't expect holidays. Don't expect family dinners. Not anymore. Her mum nodded, tears glistening like small confessions. Her dad's shoulders slumped, resignation settling into his bones. They turned to leave, footsteps heavy, shadows long in the fading light. Sophie closed the door behind them and leaned against it, the wood solid against her back. Her throat tightened, chest heavy with grief she couldn't name. They had finally said the words she'd once ached to hear. But instead of healing, the apology left her hollow, reminding her of all the years they hadn't. That night, Sophie unblocked their numbers. Her phone buzzed once, then fell silent. A small crack in the wall. But the wall still stood, and it would stand until she decided otherwise.